Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first program of the Summer Inclusion Tour. We will begin this program with a land acknowledgement to the Powhatan Lenape, Ramapo Lenape nations as a way to honor past, present, and future contributions of Indigenous people. We stand in solidarity and are committed to social justice and racial equity. It is important to understand the longstanding history that has brought us to reside on this land and to understand our place within that history. We acknowledge the genocide, ethnic cleansing, stolen land, forced removal, and enslavement of Indigenous people, communities, and nations. And we actively choose to acknowledge the many contributions to agriculture, food preparation, healthcare, education, and land protection that are interwoven into our Western culture and were re-narrativized, hijacked, and passed off as Western knowledge and Western science. Today's conversation focuses on Indigenous knowledge systems from the experience of a particular group. Yet as you are actively listening today, refocus your lens on your understanding of Indigenous knowledge. The term Indigenous knowledge does not refer to one particular group of people. Rather, it speaks to a global knowledge system that is grounded in multiple relational dynamics, respects, and perfect understanding of the relationship to nature and social environment. Before colonization, every community globally had their own knowledge system rooted in indigeneity. And we all are the product of colonialism and European standard of being, which has stripped away at that indigeneity. Our work is to identify, interrupt, unravel, and unlearn colonial patterns and dispositions, and to relearn the narratives of ancestors who understood that we are all in relationship. We all need to note that these efforts must support and work in parallel. Today's speaker is Kathleen Smith-Wenning, who worked with the Chatino and Zapoteco healers in Oaxaca, Mexico, to gain an understanding of the Indigenous culture and their knowledge systems. Kathleen, thank you so much for being here and for being so giving of your time and expertise. The floor is yours.
Thank you, everyone, and welcome to my students. I see a few names in the audience. This is exciting. It's an online course, Culture, Diversity, and Healthcare, and I have a few students in the audience from that online class. So that's kind of very cool. I've spent probably the past 20 years working in the state of Oaxaca, first as an anthropologist with Monmouth University. I did study abroad with students there. And over time, I've worked with different Indigenous groups in the state of Oaxaca, first with the Chatino, and then looking at cross-cultural health practices and beliefs, and most recently with the Zapoteco. Now, a lot of this had focused on my volunteer work with Oaxaca Street Children, which is an institution that helps educate and remove educational barriers for 600 of the poorest children in the state of Oaxaca. The state of Oaxaca has at least 13, if not more, Indigenous languages spoken. So my role as a medical anthropologist and my area of study, which I've pretty much grounded, decades of my, this is what I do for fun, of what I study are cross-cultural health practices and beliefs. Mexico is part of North America. So these are native North Americans who live in Mexico, and they currently reside. Many are mestizo, meaning they're blended into society. You would never know that they have Indigenous backgrounds or Indigenous roots or speak an Indigenous language in the home, or as happens here in New Jersey, especially in New Brunswick, where we have many monolingualists, meaning people who only speak an Indigenous language well from the state of Oaxaca. So Natalia, you may bring up my presentation and we'll start with some images of the work that I've done over this time. And some of it's recent as of last year. So here we go, Mesoamerican health practices and beliefs and the healers, and it's a persistence of Indigenous knowledge systems. So the two groups I highlight today are the Zapoteco and the Chatino of Oaxaca. Next slide. So here's the state of Oaxaca. Notice that is on, where's my I don't even know if my cursor, does my cursor work? Do I have to hit something? Well, anyway, where the red is, that's the Costa Chica area, but the green is the state of Oaxaca. So if you need a point of reference, everyone knows where Acapulco is, which is 5 hours to the north of those red boxes on the coast. So you drive 5 hours south on Carretera 200, Highway 200, and you're in the state of Oaxaca in Puerto Escondido. I spend most of my time, my earlier work was out of Puerto Escondido, the Chitino, but currently I'm where that line is in the center of the state of Oaxaca, known as the Valley of Mexico. Next slide, please. Now, when I first started the work and I began out of Puerto Escondido and traveled inland to Nopala, one thing, if you do any kind of research and you're not sure where to start, get to know the little kids, because the little kids will tell you things with a grain of salt. Sometimes they tell you fantastical stories, but if they're telling you the truth, they will give you inside knowledge where you may not be able to enter as an outsider. I'm a gringa, I am an outsider. It's obvious when you look at me when I go to these places. So my cultural attachés were Chico and Wilson. That was 20 years ago when this all started. I am sure they are 25, 20, no, probably 28 to 30 now. Next slide. These were the Doña Tomasa to the left. She was the curandera I worked with. And this woman is a traditional Chitino person who lives in Nopala. Notice the bucket of coffee beans. She was going to get her beans ground. Coffee was the main staple. It's still an agrarian, meaning a farming community, but coffee plantations, coffee grows well in this part of Oaxaca in the highlands. And unfortunately, children oftentimes are working the plantations and may not even get an education because they're small and they can get to the plants and the bushes as they cascade up the highlands, up the hills and mountains. Next slide. This is Javier Galicia Garcia. He is my good friend, my medical Spanish instructor, but Javier is also a Zapoteco. And just recently we've been codifying, writing down, recording, video recording, talking and writing about Zapoteco health practices and beliefs. And to my right, probably your left, is see the horse and the carriage. That was in front of Javier's house. Javier is a bachelor's degree in languages from the university, Benito Juarez University in Oaxaca. And this is right in front of his house. So you will have the internet cafe and you'll still use horses and draft animals in the street along the motorcycles, the trucks, the high-end cars and everything else. So that is just every day in many of these towns outside of the main city. Next slide, please. What I wanted to focus on in this presentation were three main, maybe we could call them folk diagnosis or folk illnesses, which cascade across the world. But in Mesoamerica, three of the big ones where people explain this feeling of not feeling well as susto, which is known as soul loss or a fright or a scare, mal de ojo, which is evil eye. Evil eye is well known globally, and mal aire, which is bad air. Now, all three of these disease states, let's call them, or illness states, you can find representations of all three, this is in the Spanish language, across Latin America and the Caribbean. Interestingly enough, some of the scholars have looked at the root of these explanations, these explanatory models, coming from actually ancient Spanish medicine. So while you will have indigenous practices, they've been written down and passed down and reinterpreted in very similar words throughout Latin America. Let's face it, the people in Puerto Rico or Hispaniola next to Puerto Rico were not speaking to the highland Oaxacans in the interior of Mexico to come up with some of the same names. So there had to be a core founder concept because there was no big meeting and they all decided to call susto, soul loss, susto. And you'll find it, I know, that's what I always tell the students, and you'll find it throughout Latin America. It takes on different representations depending upon colonization, and depending upon how long did the Spanish stay, how long did the French stay, how long did other groups stay in a certain area as these explanatory models ebb, flow, change, reinterpret. So susto is known as soul loss. We'll go over a quick view, and then I break these out with a little bit more detail. So oftentimes it's explained as caused by a fright or a scare, something unexpected where you probably lost one of your souls, because an indigenous interpretation may be that you have more than one soul. Then the Christian interpretation that you have one soul, an indigenous interpretation may be you have more than one soul. Mal de ojo, evil eye, that can be caused by a look. And generally a stern look could be inadvertent to a child and cause an illness in a child. We'll go over etiology, meaning the cause and the treatment, in a minute. Mal aire is bad air, could be caused by lingering spirits of the dead attacking randomly on the living. You don't feel good and you're thinking it's because of mal aire. And then a limpia is a cleaning or a purification, and it could be use medicinals or herbs, or use a curandero. And the curandero will use the herbs and maybe say some prayers, and they may interact with the supernatural or they may not. The curandera I worked with did not interact with the supernatural. So the role of the curandera is to expel the bad spirit. And notice with susto, you lost a soul. So the curandero or curandera, male or female, will coax the soul back. Next slide, please. I just love images. And this one of, I don't know if you can see these scary images with the devil sitting on this woman's chest and an ugly, I don't know what it is, a representation of a horse. Susto could be caused from nightmares. You saw ghosts or phantasmas in your dreams. We use one of these images. I have another world in sleep studies, and for people who can't sleep, they suffer from sleep deprivation. So you might go to one of these sleep labs and you'll see these scary images. It always cracks me up. So susto, some of the causes or the types. Let me stop for 1 minute. Interestingly enough, I always knew over these years that susto was known as soul loss, right? And it was only recently when Javier spoke to my class in the spring semester that I realized, as we were getting ready for the class, that in Oaxaca, his part of Oaxaca, there were 4 causes of susto. So of the 4 types, nightmares, you saw ghosts in your nightmares, an interaction with a scary or dangerous animal that could be in the street or the woods. This often happens with children who come in contact with a scary dog. It could be an accident. It could be the accident in a car, a bike, a fall from a tree, or an accident that's an unexpected event, a fall from a ladder. Or it could be because you are sick or you feel like you're getting sick. So it could be because of an illness or you feel like you're getting an illness. Next slide, please. Now, what are our treatments? Now, the treatments vary depending upon the cause. So if you've got this ghostly presence in your dreams, you will summon the curandero, who will say Catholic prayers as they're burning copal, and copal is incense. It's a resin. There are other causes of susto. And when there are other causes of susto and you've identified that it's probably not because of your dreams, the curandero, you need to gather some items. You need to gather certain herbs such as geranium flowers. Rue flowers we see growing on the highway. They're little tiny yellow flowers here in our area. Basil, interestingly enough, in the part of Oaxaca where I spend time, basil's not used for cooking and eating. Basil is only used for curing. You never eat basil. Basil could be placed on the skin as a leaf after an alcohol spray to pick up bad energy, okay? And alcohol. There are other types of herbs that are also gathered. And then alcohol. We're going to need the alcohol. So what happens first, there may be, depending upon the curandero, you may smudge with burning herbs. So in other words, if you've got our sage was not placed over there under the herbs. If you've got a long stalk of sage or rosemary, or basil's not in a long stalk, and you've got this long stalk, you will set it on fire and then let it smolder or smoke. You don't want a burning fire. So then you have the stalk and it's smoking, and then you smudge. In that opening video, they had the Native American woman holding something that looked almost like a broom. That would be a perfect device to smudge someone. She would probably hold copal burning in a ceramic bowl, and then she would use that item, that broom-like item, to smudge or to blow the smoke over the person who wants to be cleansed. Okay, so we're smudging, and then the curandero will take a mouthful of alcohol and spray the patient or the person who's sick from the mouthful of alcohol. In biomedical terms, we don't do that. But if you're in Mesoamerica, that may happen if you go for a treatment for susto. Now, the alcohol is believed to open up the pores, and then you would take the leaves from the herbs, put it onto the arms and legs, and this would pull out the negative energy or the cause that's causing susto. It would interact with the cause, and somehow you may have to coax the soul back. Okay, next slide. Now, mal de ojo, this had many different technical details. So mal de ojo, evil eye. And I want the audience to bring their knowledge to us in the question and answer, because when I teach this class, the students bring in really great information from the kitchen table. You know, a kitchen table knowledge is something we carry with us for the entirety of our life. Kitchen table knowledge is what you learn from your family and your ancestors. So kitchen table knowledge is what students bring to my classroom that really helps me understand what's going on. I think we touched that button. There we go. Okay, so evil eye, mal de ojo, adults, strong, hard look, a stare, often caused by jealousy or envy. So in an adult, if you're feeling really tired, you have a headache, oh my God, unexplained weight loss. In biomedicine, we'd call it something else. If you're really, or exhaustion or malaise, a lot of feeling tired here, you may blame it on evil eye, mal de ojo. And believe it or not, maybe the protection prior to this is to wear your undershirt inside out. I had no idea. Or to wear gold jewelry, because the gold jewelry creates a protective sphere around the individual. The treatment would be similar to the limpia, which we just discussed. Children, this happens mostly in children because adults can inadvertently gaze into the eyes of a child because they see an attractive or really cute little boy or girl. And if you look directly into the eyes of that child, it is believed that you could harm the child and cause mal de ojo. And believe it or not, a protection for mal de ojo with children is for, and I have that on the bottom, is for the adult to look at the child or ask the family member, I'm going to give the little boy, I'm going to give your son a kiss so I don't cause mal de ojo. Or oftentimes you'll see children wearing homemade bracelets with black beans, red beans, or mixed red and black beans, or they wear jewelry. I'm not sure if the practice of piercing babies' ears with gold earrings started with this or not. I haven't had an opportunity to research that, but you'll see babies with bracelets or necklaces in gold. If you don't have money for gold, silver works perfectly well. And if you don't have money for silver, then we'll do the bean bracelets to protect from mal de ojo. I work in biomedicine, and where's Anna? I'm going to crack her up I'm also a respiratory therapist. There, I said it. So what do we do? A little kid comes into the hospital. I'm in pediatrics. The kid can't breathe. We're giving him treatments. And what does he have? He may have on this bracelet with red and black beans. What are the nurses or the respiratory therapists going to do? Take a scissors and cut it. You've just upset a balance of power, a protection for the child. The parent is unhappy, and there's a belief system that you caused more harm than good. This is why it's important for people who work in healthcare to understand these many different ideas. Kitchen table knowledge, right? Now, adults can help prevent mal de ojo once again with a beso or a kiss. Next slide, please. And then we have mal aire. This one, as a respiratory therapist, came to me because there were so many times I would get patients from Mexico and Guatemala and other parts of Latin America, and they would talk about nerviosos or the nerves or mal aire, and they couldn't breathe. And sometimes you couldn't breathe because of an asthma attack, or you couldn't breathe because of a cardiac problem. But yet if the family didn't address mal aire, the patient never felt cured, okay? Or I could cure, but the patient was never healed. So you can have a cure. A cure means you eradicate the illness, or there's a healing where you make someone feel better. And sometimes with many of these maladies, all you can do is help with a healing process. You cannot effect a curing process, especially in a chronic disease. All right, so mal aire, especially with the Zapotecos and in the part of Mexico where I work, it comes from leaving a very hot place and going into some place that's very cold, such as at work, or going out into the cool night without covering your head or your body, right? So what are your symptoms? Why do you think you have mal aire? Well, first you might think, well, I went out and I didn't cover my head and it was really cold out. Headaches, body aches, fever, difficulty breathing, muscle spasms, back pain is often attributed to mal aire, which kind of seems to me it's upside down because it says bad air, yet your back hurts, but that's my biomedical brain interpretation. Numbness in the extremities, that seemed to come up a lot. And then what do? We have a treatment. It's Olympia with a curandero. Next slide, please. So the basics with the limpia. We talked a tiny bit before about the limpia, but if we want a basic limpia, which is oftentimes used in many of these different disease states or illness states or symptom states, what do we need? Who are the people? We need the curandero or curandera, male or female. We need the patient, obviously, or the person seeking this treatment, and we need family members because these treatments work best when the family is there and the community is involved in some way. This is a communal healing process. Remember that operative word, healing. But we still need equipment. So those are our people. Our equipment consists of a raw egg, very important, and I would say you would probably need 2 raw eggs, one to diagnose and one to treat. You need a clear glass with water. You need more herbs, sage, rosemary, basil, tobacco, and there's others. Aloe is in there somewhere. Once again, we need incense to burn, such as copal, and we need an idea or a notion if there's a belief in Catholic or Christian prayers. Now, we have this egg, the raw egg. We're going to take this clear glass that has water, crack the raw egg, and then watch the egg flow through the water and come down. And the diagnosis of your problem comes from the behavior of the bubbles in the water. I don't know how to differentiate with bubbles. I need more time with Doña Tomasa, and I'm not sure if she's still there. Okay, so as per Javier, Professor Javier, no, the bubbles tell you what you have. I'm like, okay. Now, eggs are also used to treat. Now, with the uncracked, very nice egg that has been soaked in salt water and is very clean, you will take this egg and you will roll it over the body and it will pull out the negative energy. Using an egg is a common practice in Chinese, Asian medicine, and in Mesoamerica. When I was in Nopala a very long time ago, there was a magic curing with a fried egg on the back of the neck. And Chico and Wilson we need to go to the bruja, the witch doctor over there, because she knows how to cure with a fried egg. So we've got the egg pulling out the negative energy. But remember, there's 2 types of limpias. We can have a limpia that can cure or heal a sickness or discomfort, or we can have a limpia that can purify negative energy. So you can purify and get rid of the negative energy, or you can receive the positive energy to turn the light, dark, yin yang type of situation into something that's better for everyone. And then we're always going to smudge with burning herbs. What time is it? Next slide, please. Ah, here's a sign. Purges, cleanings, your pain, your depression, consult with the local witch or bruja or curandera. They're Olympias. This sign is old, and Chico and Wilson mandated that I must take a picture. And let me tell you, I'm glad I did. It has followed me for many years. I think it's a great sign. And look, there's an arrow telling you where to go, up a dirt path. Pretty cool. I wonder if it's still there. I hope to go back. Next slide. I have a couple other things. These are just some of the herbs. Doña Tomasa had, get this, I'm in her small little house, concrete house, normal mestizo middle class house. And she sent her father out into the wooded area to pick some herbs. So I've got Ruda Montaña, that was for Olympia. Then next to it, the tiny little leaves, I've got Ruda Casera, that was for problems with the stomach. Then look on the bottom, my left, basil with the small tiny flowers coming up, that was for the stomach. And then believe it or not, this other flower, this other green on the bottom, my bottom right, it might be your bottom left, pitona, that was for high blood pressure. So interestingly enough, you'll have many of these herbal remedies for disease states that are very biomedical in interpretation. Next slide, please. This one, always, I need more of this. Some days I need it. Lately, I haven't needed it all. Yerba de Moina, it's for anger. Who knew? Instead of 6 deep breaths, which seem to work for me the best, you grind it with water and you drink it. You can also take a shower with it. By then, hopefully your anger is passed. And then yerba canadria, intestinal issues, grind and mix with water and drink. Those are some of the herbs I saw out in the field. Next slide, please. Oh, this is just a bibliography. And if anyone puts their, I have a couple other images I wanted to show you, but if anyone wants, I have a YouTube video with Javier and I discussing this in greater depth. It's in the chat. And then the next slide, I'll show you how the indigenous health system operates in a pluralistic mode side by side with biomedicine. And next slide, please. Oh, this was a questionnaire. I'm not going over it with you. These were questions I wanted to ask middle-class women and Native American women. But here's the Casa de Salud. In other words, it's the local clinic. It's part of the federal system. So you've got this Indian city, small town, where Zapoteco is spoken on a daily basis along with Spanish. Not too far are Mixteco speakers, another indigenous language, only a mile away spoken. And this is the clinic where they use murals to get public health information out in Spanish. Next slide, please. Let's see what else I have there. And almost, and let me do the tuberculosis education. I cut my teeth in TB education with children from other countries here in Jersey City a long time ago. And this is their public health campaign. Cough, cough, cough. You are now diagnosed. Now get inside, get your test and get your treatment. And one thing I want the takeaway to be, you can take this away, Natalia, and stop sharing. And takeaway with COVID is many of these treatments are currently used. And I did a quick search, and in Texas, many of the botanicas were the first line of defense for symptom relief. And when I spoke with Javier and a couple other people in Oaxaca just recently last week, I asked them, what do they do when they feel sick and they're afraid that they have COVID? And they treat with all of the things that we just said and others. And they're pretty surprised that the version of acetaminophen, I forget what it's called, parenthemal, I can never say the word right, is not a cure. It makes you feel better because it takes away the body aches. And with that, I open up the floor, and I would love to talk about your kitchen table knowledge so I can take back some stories to the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathleen. That was very informative. I want to share something. I didn't grow up per se with a passed down indigenous knowledge. My mother very much tried to assimilate to the American culture when she came from Panama. But I did have a family that I consider to be a family, and they took on indigenous practices. And they, when they would be sick, they used onions. They would put onions around their toes.
Yes. Feet is a
And
big one for onions. Yes.
yes,
That's a big
and
Russian one, the bottom of your sock.
yes, and you know, they put on their socks, and I would just be like, "What is it?" First off, it smells putrid, but you know, in a few days they would be better. And I'm like, what? It wasn't. It didn't naturally, you know, with my Western education, my Western understanding so limited, it just, I couldn't comprehend it. And so later in life, I've come to do some more research and try to understand it and incorporate it into my Western knowledge, try to unlearn and relearn. But thank you.
Muy bien.
See, my mom was the exact opposite. She was against all things westernized medicine. So like we almost never used medicine unless we were like,
Right.
I mean, like even if we were like bedridden sick, she would still, it was like, okay, we need to go to the health food store. Because in Newark, you had health food stores you go to, you get burdock root, dandelion, blah, blah, blah,
Yep.
here, drink this. It was disgusting most of the time, but it usually worked. So like, even if we were like congested, we weren't gonna have Vicks. She was gonna boil some onions and garlic, and you were gonna put your head over it and inhale the steam. So we always grew up like that. As a matter of fact, when we all got COVID, my son's dad, his great grandmother is still alive. She's 103 and she's from Guatemala. And she used to boil something with like apple peels and radishes and but some concoction, and Hugo's sister came over and like made a big pot of it. And so between like that and elderberry syrup and turmeric and all those different things, that's what we were taking while we were, you know, all sick with COVID. We took medicine for like what you said, the pain.
Yeah. Right.
The pain, but the herbs and the natural remedies was the go-to to deal with everything else.
It's symptom management. And it's probably more effective and less lethal for your liver than a lot of the over-the-counter that we do buy. I'll add one more in there only because this I found in my research with one of my courses is, there was a pediatric study out of Hartford, and they were looking at newly arrived people from the Dominican Republic and I think Puerto Rico. And one of the go-to remedies for children with asthma, believe it or not, was donkey milk. And I looked it up because we really don't have access to donkey milk here, and we would have irradiated it and it would have been pasteurized, and a lot of the anti-inflammatory properties of donkey milk would probably been taken away. But I did the research, and it turns out that donkey milk has the least amount of allergic properties you find in cow's milk and goat's milk. So it is used in the islands when children have an asthma attack because of its anti-inflammatory properties. It can lessen the effects of an asthma attack, which was a surprise. Anyone else with their kitchen table knowledge? Burning candles?
Candles, sage, incense,
Yeah.
Florida water, you name it. Put the Florida water outside your door and you smudge, so like no evil, no negative spirits are coming in. I mean, like I say we, meaning my mother's children. Well, not all of us, because not everybody subscribes to it, but me, my mother's youngest child, I'm all about it. Like all about it, all the things that she taught us at the kitchen table. But one thing I was thinking about, and I did want to ask this of the group, is like we all have, or I assume many of us have some variation of these things. And I was just curious to hear what pretty much what you said, the kitchen table knowledge, what experiences they've had or seen in their households or in other households that is not, you know, typical westernized medicine, but it
Right.
works, or you really believe in it.
Come aboard, unmute and talk. See, this is what happens when I teach remotely. The black boxes are staring back at me, and I have to actually have a temper tantrum, which includes me hitting my head on the desk, and then finally a student will talk. Not hard, but I'm not doing that today. It's the drama queen in me that can get people to talk, but not today.
Something I wanted to ask you, how do you incorporate, you know, being an individual who's been the product of Western education? This is what I struggle with. The product of Western education, you know, we're in the Western health field.
Right.
We understand that indigenous knowledge systems have been incorporated into Western knowledge, but the brujeria part,
right,
is seen as just that, witchcraft, or, you know,
right.
It's all that's, you know, you acknowledge it on the side, but not head on per se. Like that's, and it's almost seen as perhaps a mental illness. How do you address that?
Right. Now, it depends. Brujeria is where a lot of what I just talked about is brujeria. It is considered witchcraft in some circles because you're interacting with spirits and other beings, but the people, you know, depending upon which group you're with, you might not call it witchcraft because a witch in a certain area would only do bad things. And there are bad things. That there was a war of witches, believe it or not, in central Mexico, not far from Puebla, where they used the knowledge of poisonous plants to kill people. And it wasn't, this is back in the 1920s. It wasn't considered murder because at that time in the 1920s, the only thing that was considered murder was a gun, if you died by a gun in Mexico at that time. So the black witches or the dark witches or the witches that would do bad things would use the poisonous plants if they were commissioned to do it, to kill people. So all types of things can emerge depending upon the context. But where I find complementary medicine, and much of this applied, is in cancer care. It's pluralistic, it operates side by side. And at most of the cancer institutes, and if you do this research about botanicals and the use for symptom management, most of the research is done in cancer care. The real biomedical research as to the physical properties or the pharmacological properties of the herbs themselves. So the physicians, nurse practitioners, or any of the practitioners, or the herbologist, or whoever they have, the biologist, know the property of the plant. They know the property of the drug, and they know what can operate side by side. In other words, you can use them together. So you can have this feeling of wellness from the complementary medicine, which is believed to help keep you healthier. And then you have the detrimental effects of the types of chemotherapy or hormone replacement or whatever they're giving you to suppress the cancer cells from growing. So that is one area where these are used side by side. And you're encouraged. I know the Cancer Treatment Center in New Brunswick, I've known people to go there. They're encouraged to use certain types of complementary medicine. They're well known. I mean, over 20 years ago, I had an ICU doctor who used acupuncture and Reiki in the ICU. That's still not that common. You need to be at a big medical center where that happens. University Hospital in Newark 20 years ago, I was in there with respiratory students in the trauma unit, and they were using medical grade leeches to help reduce pressure from crush injuries. So you get this hand that's been crushed, it's full of fluid. You can't exactly slice it open to drain the fluid. And they have medical grade or medically farmed leeches, and the nurses were trained as to how to take these tongs and methodically apply the leeches to the hand. Now that's complementary medicine. That's something that's been done probably for thousands of years. Yet there are applications for these, what I would call unusual things we don't always talk about, forms of medical relief. So if you take away that swelling and that fluid and that pressure from the hand, the nerves in the hand can be spared, because that swelling and that pressure is going to compress the nerves, and it could cause death to the nerve, which will cause neuropathy, or your hand may drop because the conduction is no longer happening. So I see at the bigger medical centers, you'll see oftentimes complementary medicine, or things that kind of belong in this realm, but you don't often see with biomedicine. How do I work with it? It's more pluralistic. I try to look at it from the point of view of the people who believe it, because I will always have a job as some type of cultural interpreter, because you cannot shake the culture out of people. You cannot change their core value belief systems. And that's why with this kitchen table knowledge, enculturation, it's layers, it's onion skins and layers over time. It even happens before a baby is born. It happens the minute you're holding this kid, because the minute you're holding this kid, you're implanting your culture as to what's culturally appropriate as to how you hold the kid, how long you hold the kid, how you swaddle the kid, the temperature in the room, right? So you've already enculturated this kid into what this child's going to believe, what is right and good in their life. So that doesn't go away. You can explore it later on. You can deconstruct it and get into the weeds with, why is this happening? Why do I think this way? As maybe a young adult or an older adult trying to figure out why you react the way you do to certain things. Luckily, in higher education, we have an opportunity to ponder the big questions of life. You don't always have a chance to explore root causes or root belief systems that you're hardwired to. I mean, my master's research was on health disparities, and it was about accessing health practices and beliefs, but within minority communities in New Jersey, right, for cardiac care. There's a whole host of literature of people with PhDs and doctors who call their mother first when they have chest pain. And their mother's screaming out, "You better call 911. What is wrong with you? You're calling me first?" And it happens over and over again. Anyone else want to pick up that one and run with it? Do you call your mother first, or your tia, or your aunt, or your abuela, or your grandmother?
Really quickly, Kathleen, I wanted to read some of the comments.
Oh, good, perfect.
Denise is having her second COVID shot, so she can't unmute herself. I did tell her good luck.
Good.
Because you're so concerned.
Perfect.
But Denise says she did grow up with the home remedies. Her mom practiced the home remedies, so she is familiar with what you spoke about today. And Asvedi, and I hope I said that correctly, said that they use natural remedies and use sage to get rid of negative energy around me, which makes me feel better. I also collect crystals that I have displayed next to my sage all over the room. And crystals is a whole nother thing, right?
Like, you got to be careful with that energy as to phases of the moon and what you have in your room when you sleep. I'm not good at that, but I work with an intuitive. She's my friend. I don't do much intuitive work, but she's a psychic. But she'll warn me about stuff. She'll tell me about things that are going to happen in my life that really do happen. I'm like, Helene, sometimes I can't even talk to you because I really don't want to know what's going to happen. She goes, but spirit really wants you to know this. I'm like, okay, what is
it? It's always good to have one of those friends around.
Oh my
God. Daisy said that she's heard about using leeches to treat infected sores and infected.
That could be. Yeah. Especially if they're swollen and you've got, how do you treat it? So we need an IV medication and everything else. It just depends upon the place where you're getting treatment.
Mm-hmm.
We're pretty lucky. We're in an urban area, so that's good and bad. We're in an urban area, so we have access to lots of different things, even if you're poor. If you finally get through the door of some kind of treatment facility, depending upon where it is, you get some type of treatment. Rural America, I did this in South Texas, it's a whole other thing. You don't get treatment for days and maybe weeks on end because you don't have a car, you're not getting anywhere. So you really default to a lot of these settings. Now for this with using addicts breakdown because of IV drug use, I haven't heard that one, but it makes sense. There was somebody else, who was it? Denise Ramirez, said her mother was from Mexico. I'd be interested what part of Mexico. If you can just type in the chat, what part, where are you from? My other favorite place, but it's not Indigenous, is Aguas Calientes. It's a beautiful museum scene, but that's a whole other thing. I can't see all the chat. What else is here?
Denise said Veracruz.
Oh, wow. You're on the coast. It's really hot. What I know about Veracruz was one of the places where they grew huge industry in growing sweet potato yams. And yams were big, and I believe contraceptives, and I can't remember what other types of reproductive health. It was an enormous area. I'll just leave that alone. My brain defaults to all types of strange information.
You corrected, you said yams. When you said sweet potato and then yam, I think you said.
Yeah, it was yam.
And I was watching High on the Hog on Netflix now. It talks about like African American food culture, and it talked about like the distinction between sweet potatoes and yams.
I know.
And I do use the words. I use them interchangeably. The words, but I'm a little more conscious of it, of the difference now. Whereas before I'm like sweet potatoes, yams, it's the same thing, but it's not.
No, and the chemical properties are different. Yeah, but I use it interchangeably. Oh, rosemary is used too. Yep, see that? Romero, yeah. Very good. One other interesting thing that I've picked up along the way, and the studies have been done with African-American populations in, say, Louisiana, and I've done these lunch and learns over the years, not recently, with like Baptist church groups, with women in the community. And it was to validate the knowledge, just because you read an article, does this really happen? So I would reach out to the African-American community in Long Branch and talk to the older women and say, is this true? And there's this belief with high blood pressure. So we know African-Americans and many Latinos suffer from high blood pressure. But an interesting finding is that many of the doctors who treat the patients don't understand the folk definition of blood pressure. So there's a difference between high blood pressure and something called high blood, where you might think your blood is thick and it needs to be treated with certain home remedies. And high blood pressure might be called tension that can be treated with drugs, but the other one can't. So if the practitioner doesn't understand the person's explanatory model of what they're trying to tell them, they may give them a treatment that they won't take. Because if their interpretation is that their blood is too thick and that's what's causing their headaches, they're not going to take the blood pressure medicine. So that's where I try to bring some of this awareness forward to the health science students, so that when they land in a chosen career later on in life, they have to first listen, second, listen, and third, listen, because it's so easy just to default to our biomedical model. That's my speech.
Thank you. So really quick, I kind of just wanted to add to that. You're speaking about the biomedical industry. It's very similar to agriculture and chemistry, where we're seeing indigenous knowledge systems and just the indigenous culture and ways of knowing being incorporated in parallel to chemistry to start to heal our soil, essentially, because we began with this beautiful, nourished soil, and over time it's so depleted that what they predict in like 6 years, our soil will be completely damaged and everything's going to be made in a chemistry lab.
Right.
Yeah.
We lost the ability to allow areas of land lie fallow. In other words, leave it alone, let it replenish itself, and that could take years. So the agribusiness just keeps dumping fertilizer into it, and it depletes the topsoil. And then the soil after a while it's denuded of any type of nutrient, and it's almost impossible for it to come back. When you go to Latin America, you go to the Caribbean and you go to Mexico, they'll use, and for some of the teachers in the audience, this is on the praxis exam, Swidden agriculture, slash and burn. So slash and burn does work if after a time you let that area of land lie fallow, you let it rest. So slash and burn is you cut down the weeds, you let burn the field, it burns off the insects or whatever is bad, and a little bit of nitrogen gets in the soil. So it's good for a couple of years, but you have to let it rest. You have to rotate where you grow your crops. But in agribusinesses, we don't rotate. And then we've got all these genetically modified foods. And then the wind moves the way the wind wants to move. So the genetically modified fields of seeds blow over to the organics. So that's a whole other area that's immense in study. I know there's a big push now to pull back. There are seed banks to bring back the original seeds and to plant those crops and start growing more of those crops to get more seeds. Otherwise, we lose it forever.
Like the corn.
Yeah, like the corn.
Yeah. Well, it's 2:52.
There we go.
Thank you so much. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to add?
Thank you for having me and listening to my anthropological speech.
Thank you so much for being so willing and giving up your time and expertise. We really appreciate you.
Thank you. Is that it?
All right. Well, if no one has anything else to add, we're going to conclude this program. We thank everyone who is here for taking the time out to learn about Indigenous knowledge systems. And just as a reminder, this is just one small seed. Go out and do some additional research on how you can incorporate this in parallel to your own Western education.
And then one plug for another presentation I'm doing July 1st is about unaccompanied minors. It's about children on the border. I was a volunteer for the Young Center for Immigrant Children's Rights in New York City, and I would accompany the last little girl she was 7, and I accompanied her to immigration court. So we'll do more of the application of the United Nations rights of the child. So they're violated every day, and most of us will be working with children at one point in our service careers. And I think it's a good way to remember that children do have rights. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
You're welcome.